I'll call the special meeting of Municipal Council of the District of Lunenburg to order. It's Thursday, June 25th, and it is 7:10. We begin our meetings by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and we are privileged to share the land with them. The approval of the agenda. I will suggest we do need a motion to approve the agenda, but we'll take 3.2, the expanded public input, because we don't do that during this process of our meeting. So if someone would approve the agenda with the deletion of 3.2, moved by Councillor.
On my agenda, 3.2 is council deliberation. Oh, this is an amended one. Okay. All right. Yeah.
So moved by Councillor Burns, seconded by Councillor Smith. The agenda, all those in favor of accepting the agenda with the deletion of 3.2, motion is carried unanimously. We will then move to the repeal and replacement of the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw. And I do want to make some comments because of the discussion of the discussion tonight presented by a number of our municipal residents and also from the submissions we received. I think it's important to recognize this has been a long process, and we have, and I did hear from people to say that they didn't know about this, and we've tried to be as diligent as possible in communicating what this means. It is a large document with a lot of implications in a municipality that hasn't had a long history with municipal planning. As I think our director said, Mr. Merrill, that we are the last. And so when this council started the work last March, we took a hard look at this and said we needed to really have good public engagement. And all I can say is we tried our best, but clearly tonight there are people in front of us who are telling us that they did not know about it and did not know the implications, and I think we have to be respectful of that. During the discussions, the initial discussions, a lot of the conversation we heard from residents was around livestock numbers, and we made changes that reflected that. There were issues around home-based businesses, around RVs. We heard about that again tonight, concern about that. I think our council has recognized that it is a reality that we have a large number of residents that are living in RVs because it is an affordable option for housing. So there have been a number of changes, but as we approach the final deadline, the issue of agricultural land has certainly surfaced about how it was designated agricultural land and what land should be preserved under that agricultural potential zone. Many of you have referred to the maps that were used, the soil maps and soil designation that we heard from residents, and concerns about that captured forested lands, and then in some respects didn't capture agricultural land that it has been farmed for some time. My recommendation as the mayor, and I offer this to council before we get into the discussion, is that, and I think our staff are prepared to discuss, because that's the advantage of having submissions in advance. Our staff have been able to do further research and really consider this. My recommendation tonight will be that we turn down our municipal plan as it's been presented, and that we ask staff to reconsider on some of the things that we have heard tonight. And we have heard not only tonight, but Councillor Burns, I will highlight, because he covers one of the areas where perhaps it was most evident. He's not the only one, but he's been a strong advocate about the forested land and its designation as Class 3 and therefore classified under our agricultural zoning. So my recommendation is that we turn this down tonight. We're going to hear from staff because they have some suggestions about how we can proceed and what changes we can make. They've done further research that I think may help us in our consideration. And we want to get this finished. We've been working at this for 18 months, and we have other work to do as a council, but we want to think about it carefully. And we can, staff have informed me that we can have this brought back for first reading, because now the process is, if we defeat it tonight, we have to bring it back and start the process again. So it will come back for first reading in July 14th. And then we'll go through the similar process for public hearing and a second reading, which we can do by the end of July. That gives us time as a council to reconsider and to really evaluate what we've heard and to consider what staff are going to propose as some options for us to think about and improvements that may reflect what we're hearing from residents. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our staff. Ms. Gindi will lead us in the details of what we have heard, summarizing that, but also suggesting how some of the concerns can be addressed that you've heard tonight. And then we'll open it for council discussion.
Yes, so thank you, Mayor. Planning staff would like to present an update and an optional to agricultural preservation in the municipality based on written submissions that the planning team has received, but also based on input that we received tonight that was pretty similar to information that we received prior to the public hearing. So staff revisited the statements of provincial interest on agriculture to determine whether there was an alternative approach that would remain consistent with its intent while providing a more targeted and flexible method of protecting agricultural land. As part of that review, staff developed the following option for council's consideration. The proposed option recognizes that the Canada Land Inventory soil mapping was prepared at a scale of 1 to 250,000. While it's appropriate for identifying areas of agricultural capability, its application at the individual property level may be subject to uncertainty. To address this, the proposed option would replace the rural agricultural potential zone with a rural agricultural overlay. The overlay would apply to lands identified as active farmland through the province's agricultural land identification project that was done in 2018. That also contains at least 60% of Class 3 Canada Land Inventory soil. The proposed overlay would apply to approximately 1,170 properties covering approximately 1,578 hectares of active agricultural land. The proposed overlay would also permit private roads and flag lots, retain the maximum subdivision limits to 6 lots within the area where the overlay applies, retain the prohibition on cluster development, remove the minimum 4-hectare parcel size requirement, and introduce a new Schedule C, identifying where rural agricultural overlay applies. So as you can see on the slide, the image on the left illustrates how the proposed rural agricultural potential designation and zone would have applied. Under that approach, the agricultural zoning regulations apply to the entire property. The image on the right illustrates the proposed rural agricultural overlay. So under this approach, the underlying land use designation and regulations remain in the place where the actual overlay applies. So in most cases, the zone would be a rural general zone, so the most permissive zone that we have under the municipal planning project. While the agricultural overlay regulations would apply only to the identified overlay area. This allows agricultural protection to be focused on the actively farmed portion of the property while providing greater flexibility for the remainder of the property. Using an overlay rather than a separate zone provides greater flexibility because the underlying zoning remains in place, unlike a zone which applies to the entire property. The overlay can be applied only to the portion of the property identified as the active farmland through the Provincial Agricultural Land Identification Project, and allowing agricultural protection to be focused on lands that are actively being farmed while avoiding unnecessary restrictions on the remainder of the property. The overlay also provides a more efficient administrative process where site-specific information becomes available. If a qualified person's assessment demonstrates that the mapped area does not contain the required proportion of Class 3 soils, the development officer could adjust the extent of the overlay without requiring a rezoning or land use bylaw amendment. Future adjustments would be based only on verified soil information provided by a qualified person and not whether agriculturally active has started or ceased on the property. Overall, this proposed portion provides a more precise, streamlined, and adaptable approach to protecting agricultural land while remaining consistent with the intent of the Statement Provincial of Interest regarding agriculture. Next slide, please. So if council wishes to consider this alternative approach, staff would need to revise the municipal planning strategy, land use bylaw, and mapping to reflect the proposed rural agricultural overlay. Because these changes are substantive, the municipality will need to undertake a new legislative process and beginning with a new first reading. Staff are proposing the timeline shown on the screen. So staff would revise the planning documents. Council would consider first reading on July 14th. A public information session will then be held to present the revised proposed changes. And a public hearing would follow on July 29th with a second reading taking place the same evening if council chooses to proceed. This process ensures the public has an opportunity to review and comment on the revised agricultural framework before council makes its final decision. And there are two motions, whether if council decides to conduct second reading today, that would be the motion. And if council would wish to stop the clock on the previous first reading, then that's the following motion.
Okay, you've heard some new information from Ms. Gindi and the planning staff who've responded, I think, to some of the concerns we heard. This would be an opportunity for discussion and question on any aspect of the strategy, and I will entertain questions now, and then we'll get to a stage where we're ready to consider a motion. So the floor is open to council members. Councillor Oikel and then Councillor Hubley.
Thank you. Well, there's certainly nothing like boots on the ground, right? And I'm really glad that you all have come in and spoken earlier, as well as the emails that we received, because a few times I have said specifically regarding the division of the property when people don't want to farm it, when you don't have family members wanting to farm it, or you want to sell it off into smaller parcels, that it will be a challenge and a difficulty under what we presently have in the previous draft. So I'm really glad to see this. I'm wondering if we can also talk about the concerns regarding tiny homes not being on wheels. If you could kind of go over perhaps some of those concerns that were mentioned, if you don't mind, if that's possible.
I can start and then Rosemary or Jeff can add on. Tiny homes on wheels will be deemed as a recreational vehicle. Hence, in order to, in the regulations, how we've written it down, that we require a tiny home to be on foundation that will be considered as a permanent structure. So that was technically the differentiation between a tiny home and a recreational vehicle that can be moved and not necessarily meet the setback requirements if you're moving within, if you're not staying in a certain place for over 180 days. But maybe Rosemary can add on to that as well.
Just that the intention, I think, of the both municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw is to recognize that it's important to permit a variety of different housing types. And so the draft 3 does permit habitation of recreational vehicles as well as the habitation of tiny houses. Again, to Ella's point, it does state that tiny houses need to be on a foundation, but if a dwelling meets the definition of a recreational vehicle, it would be permitted under that definition. So the intention is to permit recreational vehicles and the habitation of it. It's stating that after 180 days, you would need a permit just to make sure that the setbacks, residential setbacks of that zone are met. And you would still be able to continue living in that RV after that, receiving that permit. So the intention behind the municipal planning strategy is to recognize that there are need for a variety of different housing types in our municipality.
And just to add to Rosemary's point, in the definition, it says it needs to meet a certain standard. It's just to make sure that an RV was manufactured in a factory and was not built, it's not homemade. And the reason for that is just to make sure and maintain the safety of the resident who lives in that structure. So make sure that it meets fire standards and other aspects that are part of manufactured. So it doesn't have to meet the specific standard that is in the definition. It says or an equivalent, and the meaning for it is to make sure that it was manufactured properly for the safety of residents.
And just to add to that, so an equivalent standard would include older standards that might be, recreational vehicles that might not meet that current standard, but might have been manufactured to an older standard. Equivalent standard allows for that flexibility.
Next is Councillor Hubley.
So I don't really have any questions. I'm very happy to hear what's happened tonight, and I support the mayor's recommendation. Thank you. We have put a lot of work into this, but I think it's more important that we would listen to the people.
Deputy Mayor Vino.
Thank you. Through this process, I've raised concerns at numerous meetings over the agricultural piece. And one of my concerns that I was worried about is during the public consultation that we weren't hearing from residents that had skin in the game, the ones who owned these properties versus ones that just like to look at the properties. So I believe that's evidence here tonight that we're hearing directly from those who live in the agricultural zone. So I'm glad to see that we're potentially pivoting depending on how we vote for that. The suggested changes that were a few slides back, I think I wrote it down correctly. You were looking to retain this 6, where is it here?
The subdivision of
Yeah.
6 lots, yeah.
The subdivision of 6 lots total. I'm getting some pushback on that, and I wanted to know if you could explain where that number came from, because if it's over 6, normally it would trigger a cluster development, which would have regulations. So why in this draft did we have the suggestion of the 6 lots?
I think you answered the
Yeah.
question in a way. We use the 6 lots number as based of what was the number for cluster developments. Right now, with the proposed change, that subdivision requirements will only apply to where the overlay area is and not to the entire property. So for example, if you can see on the photo on the right, the zoom in, so where the tiny brown area is, that's where the subdivision restrictions would apply. The entire property that is currently looks like is mapped as white, which is the rural general zone. You can have as many subdivisions there as you would like. The limitation would only apply to the brown area. And again, if council thinks that limiting it to 6, to limiting subdivisions to only 6 lots is too restrictive or not restrictive enough, that's up to council's consideration to make. Other municipalities are using that, or they are limiting the number of subdivisions that can be done per year. So that's an option that council can also consider if they think that that is too restrictive.
I appreciate that, thank you. And will new maps be developed before the July 14th meeting so we can look in our districts, and if we choose to reach out to certain folks, we can let them know of potential changes and have that information available to folks tonight that might want to see that.
Correct.
Counselor Moore and then Burns.
As for the issue of living in RVs, after 180 days, it's a development permit that is required?
Correct. And the development permits would, in a nutshell, would look at, do you meet the setback? So is it 2 meters away from the sides or the rear? It's usually a 2-meter setback that is required. And it depends on the zone. If it's in the rural residential zone, the front setback, so the flankage, is 3 meters. And for other zones, it's 6 meters. So those are the requirements under what we currently is being proposed. And those are what we're looking for, and also looking to see if you're meeting any environmental setbacks as well, so what setback from water courses.
And what about the ones that are already in place now? Are they grandfathered?
They are grandfathered in unless they're moving.
Thank you.
And the grandfather, it's important to note, grandfathering clause or the lawfully existing structures applies to the property. It does not apply to the property owner. So let's say theoretically that RV or a house is staying in place, that clause is to the property. So if the property owner sells that property, that clause is still remain in place.
Counselor Burns.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I don't miss sort of the opportunity to say this as we move towards a motion, and then we'll end up speaking on the motion. But I'd just like to really, I'm encouraged by what I see in front of me, and I'd like to strongly encourage folks to send this back to first reading. I don't think that'll be a surprise, given my comments and no vote at the last meeting. But I, you know, without explicitly endorsing this plan until I've had a little bit more time to digest it, I am interested to see it primarily because land use planning sits at the nexus of greater community good versus individual rights over ownership. And it's about a balance and ensuring people can be comfortable with that balance and that there's enough buy-in that it preserves the legislative scheme that you're moving forward. And so I see opportunity here to do that. I think there's going to be continuous work that goes forward. I think there's going to be more opportunities. People are going to want to say, hey, my land's not caught in this. How could I preserve it? Is that something I do on my own? Is that something I need help with? And the conversation won't end, but if the conversation starter is one from a place of more positivity and less fear, then that is a conversation that can continue. And I want to just share with everyone that there are way more voices on this than what you're hearing tonight. I hear a lot of voices on this. It's because I represent a district that will have a lot under the last plan of the RU2 zoning. And so there were a number of people. In fact, it has been the predominant conversation I've had over the last year, more so than any other item that I came to council to advance. Residents have talked to me about this, and by and large, what they want is agricultural lands that are used in agricultural protection to be protected such that it maintains food supplies, but also continues to maintain, for lack of a better term, the nature of their community. Even if it's not their land, the fact that they live in a community with this activity is how they identify themselves and identify with the community. So there's a bigger piece at play here. Let's get it right. And I'm not afraid of the provincial timelines because we're working towards something that the people of our municipality are going to be utilizing and are going to be subject to and are going to be benefiting from. And I'd rather get it right than meet a deadline. And I'm not going to live in fear of the deadline because I've said this many, many a time, and I'm sure this will come back to haunt me. But if they feel so strongly it needs to be rushed, then I absolutely dare them to step in and take the flak themselves, because everything I came to council to do has been set aside so we have to do this. And they're off doing their own provincial legislative things that they want. So if they feel so strongly it needs to be done quickly, then step in and do it and take the flak yourselves. Otherwise, I'm here to get it right. And I'd strongly encourage folks to not be afraid of a deadline. Let's go back and get it right.
Counselor, I'm going to go to Counselor DeLong first, and then we'll come back if others want to make a second comment. Counselor DeLong.
Thank you. And thank you to the residents who have come to give us their perspective tonight. I think that it's important to note that it was never council's intention, and I shouldn't speak for council, but there's been a lot of discussion at this table on this topic about how we avoid creating hardship for our residents and how we do our due diligence to make sure that we are not rendering properties undevelopable, that we are making sure that people who have invested in their land and want to pass ownership on to their family are able to do these things. I'm really encouraged that we are going to take one last stab at getting this absolutely right, because there's been so much work done to this already that it would be a shame to, just throw it over the end zone just to get it done. I do also want to note that even if we had, or rather, if first reading had passed and then we did second reading tonight, this was always meant to be a living document that would be reviewed frequently and that could have new input put into it. So I'm glad that we're still listening, and I am really, really proud of the amount of public input that staff and council have put into this. Thank you.
Councillor Smith, and then I'll come to Councillor Wycliffe.
Just to start on the housing options, we introduced a few things in draft 3 to clarify definitions that threw people for a loop. And I will say myself, I also had to get clarification. What does this mean on the ground for people? So I sought clarification. I've been speaking to a few residents in depth about this who have a lot of experience with tiny houses, especially. And after working through and getting clarification, I do feel that the document as it is, and with the staff clarifications, that we are actually providing the people with the ability to live in these different kinds of homes. So the tiny homes on foundations, first people came to me and said, wait a minute, provincial building code is never going to allow me to do what I want to do. We looked into the provincial building code and they said, oh, I didn't know that it was updated. Actually, it's quite permissive when it comes to tiny homes. So we worked through that. The tiny homes on wheels, I still do have some outstanding questions about how it's going to be implemented. So if a tiny home on wheels can be is permissible if it meets the CSA standard. I think that some of that is going to have to be worked out in implementation, but I think that the goal is to allow alternative housing options, but to ensure that they're safe. So the only thing I would say about what comes next on that front is that we really need to develop some good communication tools, because that document created a lot of anxiety. It's very difficult to read because you've got to go definition, policy, and also the land use bylaw. So it is very difficult to read, and not everyone before I became a counselor and went through this process, I wouldn't have known how to read it. So we need some really good communication tools so that people don't feel, oh my goodness, this excludes me and now I need to fly under the radar. As far as the rural agriculture potential zone goes, I am a little concerned with making changes at the last minute. without going back to some of the people that we consulted earlier. So we did have a table, agriculture table that we did like some stakeholder consultation with. So I would appreciate if that was kind of reviewed with those stakeholders, because it was my impression that they were in favor of the RU2 zone as it was, and if we're making changes, I would want to give them a heads up that we're doing that, so that they can come and speak into public input when the draft comes back with changes. It's difficult. We did a lot of public consultation, and it's still coming, and I really appreciate all the public input, and I'm certainly open to making changes in the, especially in the R2 zone with the next draft, I guess.
No, you can't ask a question from the gallery. We're happy to answer your question when the meeting is over. And we do have very detailed record of the discussion at council meetings, and also the discussion and recording what we heard from many of the public consultations. That information's on the Engage Modal website. You can go to our website, and there's a whole section there with all the documents that have been produced related to this over the last 18 months and even prior to that. And the discussions that have happened at council, we can also refer you to which meetings those were, where there was attention to the particular discussion around this, and you can watch the videos there. So we can speak with you after the meeting. I have Councillor Oikel next.
Thank you. So I just want to understand the rural agricultural overlay, because I like this one better. So this is just for present land that's being farmed with Class 3 soil or better?
Correct. So we're using a layer from the province that discusses active farmland.
Okay.
That was done in 2018. It was a project that was done in 2018. So we're using that information. And on top of that information, we're looking at those existing farmlands. We added an additional analysis to understand these sections, these polygons or these parcels, of those, they have to have 60% and up, Class 3, to meet the Statement of Provincial Interest requirements.
And a follow-up. So when I think of what happened in COVID, some of those farms that were farmed are no longer being farmed, but yet they would have still been on that list in 2018. So there could be a possibility that this overlay will go on areas that haven't been farmed for quite a number of years, as well as, is it possible also for them not to get some land that is farmed? Like, is it a possibility that they missed? Like, how did they come up with it?
Based on the information we received, most of the information was done from aerial imaging. So they looked at aerial imaging to see the way of the land and how topography looks like. And based on that, they assessed if there is any agricultural land that's being viewed. Yes. And other mapping records that they had. But most of all, aerial topography to assess the way of the land and if it looks like a farm. Then, to answer your first question, whether if older farms that are inactive that are captured with this, as of right now, we don't know if they're active or inactive. Based on what we are proposing, that regulation would apply to it. However, if council wants to provide directions to staff to add a policy that helps with exemptions or anything like that, that's up to council to decide, but it has to be decided today and let us know how to provide us directions today if you want to proceed to first reading on July 14th.
Are there other, Councillor Reinhardt, I'm sorry. You were on the list, too.
Thanks, and thanks to the people who came in today to speak. And some of you I spoke to at the information session last week, and it's been very illuminating. This is the rural agricultural piece is such an important part of this. Residents talk to me almost on a daily basis about concerns about farmland loss and food sovereignty and food security. This is such an important piece that we have to get it right. It's not going to be perfect, but we have to get it as right as possible. And I think it's clear from the past engagement that it's not right the way it is. So I really appreciate staff's responsiveness to adapt and try to find something that works for more people. So that's what I think about the rural agricultural piece. And then I'd also like to just briefly talk about the RV and tiny home piece as well, because I agree, I think the intention is to allow for more types of home and more flexibility with homes. But there's something that's not being communicated correctly. And if people are reading this document and feeling fear that they're going to be made homeless, that's a big problem. So that's something that needs to be reworked a little bit.
But if council provides direction, we can revise our definition to be in more plain language so the members of the public will understand that recreational vehicles are habitation is permitted, and just make it a bit more clear for the public.
I think that, I think we've recognized as we've worked through it as a council that this is a very complex process, and definitions matter, and how we communicate it. I think it's been brought up a number of times that you have to read the strategy, and then you have to look at the related bylaw, and then you have to go back and read definitions. It is the function of how these things are put together. I don't know if there's a simpler way. I mean, planners are technicians and professionals in how these things are done. And but I think we've identified some areas where we can provide more clarity in what is defined and how that then is translated by the public when they read it. I do want to assure people that the conversation we had around tiny homes and RVs and their use as housing options was deeply felt by everyone at the table. Everyone recognized that this is a reality in our community, and I you know, we've all driven throughout our community, and I have seen, I don't know, hundreds of people living in RVs, because I've covered a large portion of this district when I campaigned. So I have to tell you that was a bit eye-opening for me to see that, and also to know that this is a reality of our community, and that somehow we need to recognize how we can accommodate that in a planning strategy. This morning I was in a meeting, and this is a little off, but it does relate, in a meeting with people from across Nova Scotia about homelessness and what municipalities can do to address this. And this is one thing that we could say we have done. We are looking at this, and there are many municipalities now that are looking at how they can adjust their planning strategy to accommodate the needs for more affordable housing. And if that's an RV or a tiny home, then it needs to be recognized by the planning strategy. So I think our council, for the benefit of everyone, we take this very seriously in what we're trying to do here. As a number have said, it may not be perfect. It won't be perfect. We're going to find holes in it, but we're trying to do the best we can. Are there other, Deputy Mayor Vino?
Thank you. I just want to come back to the 6 lots total and looking at the picture on the screen of the potential new rural agricultural overlay. And I don't own any lots, by the way, but if I own that lot there with the larger brown piece, and I wanted to put lots on that property. And I do not believe that that piece is agricultural. What steps can a homeowner take to critique that or bring that forward to say that it's actually not? I'm skeptical with mapping from the province ever since our flood risk mapping came in 2020. So I'm very skeptical, and owners will know their property better than the province and certainly better than me. So could you speak to how a homeowner could challenge what we would be zoning as agricultural overlay?
Certainly. So as was written in the previous draft, if a property owner considers or believes that that specific area is not class-free, they can hire a qualified person to do a study and provide us with a study that indicates that the land is, for example, class 5 or 7. With this proposed option, it will be more streamlined because we don't have to go with this to council for our rezoning application. That once the study is provided, similar to our inland or coastal wetland policies, if we provide a report, if we are provided with a report that indicates that it's not class 3 soil, but 5, 6, 7, whatever, we can remove those restrictions from that overlay, and the property owner can continue that subdivision instead of applying or requesting a rezoning application that might be approved or not approved by council and has to go to the province for a final approval. So we are actually streamlining the process with that option.
Councillor Smith.
Is this framework or this rural agricultural overlay in place in another municipality that has had its land use plan accepted by the province, and this is something that we anticipate that the province would accept?
It is not, there are other municipalities that have overlays or have a zone or don't have either, and they just have general provisions to protect agricultural land. Each municipality has different soil classification, land sizes, and ways that they want to protect agricultural land. In terms of the statement of provincial interest, it does meet the statement of provincial interest. So, Rosemary, if you can move a few slides, we have that as well here. Statement of provincial interest is pretty small, so it's hard to see, but the first thing is we must identify agricultural land. Another thing is what we should consider is giving priority to uses of agricultural land, which we are allowing. All of our zones, except from the protected watershed areas and the conservation zone and our parks, which is our zone, which is basically identifying our municipal parks on our map, enables and allows and promotes agricultural uses and agricultural practices, whether if in their small scale or large scale. In addition to that, we should identify existing agricultural land. So that's something we are doing with the overlay. In addition to that, limiting the number of lots. So that provision applies, limiting subdivision to up to 6 lots, and also setting separation distances, which we already have in our municipal planning strategy, where new developments must maintain a setback from agricultural uses that are of a neighboring property. And we are also having erosion and topsoil policies as well. So technically, we're meeting the statement of provincial interest with the new optional approach.
Just to follow up on that, the statement of provincial interest requires that we identify agricultural lands. So we're identifying active agricultural land with class 3 soil. But as many people have pointed out, we are not including active farms that do not have class 3 soil. So do we anticipate that that will be an issue with the province if we're leaving out actual active farms because they don't have class 3 soil?
So part of that statement, which I don't think we can see it here or not, but it does say that we need to identify it with using the CLI, so the Canada Land Inventory. So we are doing that and we're also adding it to existing farmland. In addition to that, farmland is permitted in all zones except from the conservation zones. So we're not prohibiting or limiting agricultural uses in most zones in our municipalities, except from zones that we need to limit agricultural uses just because of the potential of contamination of ecologically significant or our watershed areas.
Councillor Royko.
I'm concerned about the fact that a landowner has to prove financially that their land is not good enough for agriculture because the province is saying that it is on their overlay. So because the province says it is on their overlay, but yet they know that it isn't, that they need to have and pay for somebody to come in to say what they already know. So I'm just wondering if there's something we can do about that so that that doesn't become an issue for people, because, you know, they know their land. And if Norma were to go out, she would see that it's not. Like, why would they need to prove something that they know?
I'll let Ms. Gindi speak to this, and then I'll comment.
So based on the statement of provincial interest, we must use the Canada Land Inventory data to base our analysis of class 2, 3, and 4. In our municipality, at least according to the map, we have class 3, we have class 5, and we have class 7. So class 3, according to the mapping and with the availability of soils that we have in our municipality, that's the most fertile land that we have. So according to the statement of provincial interest, we must identify these type of soils, and we must protect active farms with these types of soils, or the entire parcels. In this case, we realize that it could be a potential burden. However, that policy is actually there to provide an exemption or an opportunity not to be bound by that regulatory piece. So yes, it does have financial portion to it, but some property owners would prefer that option rather than not at all.
I think just as a follow-up to that, one of the things we've heard, and in the submissions that we've received and also tonight, we have people saying, you know, even the people that have not been happy with what we've done said, I want farmland preserved, but it's how we identify what is actually actively farmed. And with our previous draft, we had these large sections that were, and people have identified this, that were forested, that were classified as class 3 soils, but forested. And we've heard from many people to say that was never farmed, it's never going to be farmed, it is rocky, it may have class 3 soil, but it isn't what people would pick. We would suggest maybe that's where the houses should be built. They can cut the trees down, put a house in there, and preserve those pieces of land that are class 3 and actively farmed. I looked at the map, and when you all get it, you'll go through it, I know, and you will identify it isn't perfect. There are farms that are being farmed, land that's being farmed, that aren't captured by this agriculture map. So it's not perfect, and we know that. But it's, in my mind, to be asked, that when we're asked by the provincial government to provide them with a plan using their maps and their documentation to support what we're trying to do, to me, there's some alignment there. We may be worried about that map a little bit, as Deputy Mayor Vino has suggested, but any map we use, if it's used from an aerial photo or from historic data that might go back many years, that isn't perfect. But I think what it does, it frees up that forested land that was classified as class 3, and that those references that have been made tonight to shale pits and rocky spots and all of that, Not to say that some of the Class 3 farms that are Class 3, or farms that are now large, significant farms and even small farms, when you look at their fields and say, how in the world can you grow anything on that? You know, that it is true. We have a lot of rocky soil here, but people are managing to still actively farm on it. And there are, you know, lots of ways people do that. So I don't know if that helped clarify, but I think this step in using the overlay of agricultural land frees up some of that, a much larger portion of the land that was designated as agricultural under that protective area that was forested, which was really the part that was really, you know, really causing a lot of people grief, to say that's never going to be farmed. They're not going to clear that land for a farming field.
Mayor, so I wasn't questioning that in having the overlay. That's a good idea. What I was questioning was that the overlay may specify that a certain person's property is agricultural land, but in reality it isn't, and they will have to pay to prove that it isn't, because the province is saying it is. That's what I'm questioning, whether or not there is something that we can do so that it isn't a burden on a landowner to prove that his land isn't a farmland, even though the province has said that it is, because we're using that overlay. That's what I was wondering about.
There's two options. Well, there's more than two options, but theoretically, one of the options is that council can direct staff to add a policy that inactive farms of X amount of years that haven't been inactive for, so let's say theoretically they've been inactive for 10 years. If that's what council would like to do, then they can provide us, if they can provide us proof that they've been inactive for X amount of years, then we can remove that from the map or keep it, but then they have to provide the proof that it's an infertile land. So there are options. The option that I just provided right now is not something we brought to the table, but again, if council wants us to do something to provide options for inactive farms that have been inactive for a long time, we can find a way to embed a policy that provides more opportunities for farms that were inactive.
Councillor Burns.
2 points. One, I think tonight, like, we are all going to need a bit more time to digest this. I think we're at a point where we say, yes, like, there's some intrigue in taking a different approach to this, and I'm really excited to see that this time go around. So I think tonight our process should be to send this back to first reading so we can do our work as councillors on it to make sure that we understand it and that we're talking to the people that we know that this is going to affect one way or another, and so that we can come back to the next first reading with a more informed perspective. What we're doing tonight is saying, yes, we're not happy with the status quo. We want a new form, and in the vote at the next meeting for first reading would be, is the new form that was brought forward acceptable enough? So on a process standpoint, I think that's where we should head towards. A motion is what I would gently nudge us all towards. And then the second thing is, and I know that tonight agricultural land is rightfully getting its time in the sun on this, but the mechanism to prove that the soil is not class 3, however this is going to be, I just want to flag for people, is the same for wetlands. And I've heard from a lot of people about wetlands or watercourse setbacks that are upset, and I even know from a lot that I own that the provincial mapping of the wetland is much larger than what that wetland would be in any other time than a once-in-a-100-year event. But it is on me to go and pay someone to tell the province they're wrong, and that is unfortunate, but I just want to flag that for anyone listening. It's not just agriculture. That is, anytime we rely on provincial data that involves this mapping, that involves their scans, the onus, regardless of the subject matter, is the province thinks it's this way. If you'd like to tell them they're wrong, you can, but you got to do it on your dime. Don't love it, but it's across the board kind of the way it is, and I think that gives some context here so we don't drill down too much just for agricultural. It's more about a policy of generally, in all of these circumstances, I would say, whether it's wetlands or agricultural, then is it council's role to provide that support or not? Or is it an advocacy role or what it is? But a different question we won't answer tonight.
Okay, I think, Counselor Smith, then we're going to have the motion.
Just a very quick caveat. I do support sending this back to first reading. When it comes back to us, I would ask for a generous amount of time with the first reading package that we can review, if there's any wiggle room there at all, because sometimes it's very difficult to take that information and consult with your residents with such a short turnaround time. So just asking for if there's any room for extra time around that with materials, I would very much appreciate it.
Would someone put the motion on the floor? This is the motion that was proposed for second reading, and as I said, my recommendation is, and I think based on the conversation tonight, we'll defeat that motion, and then we will use the second motion to give direction to staff to start the first reading process again, and with any additions to that direction we want to provide. Councillor Burns, do you want to table that?
I'll do it. To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that municipal council conduct second reading and repeal the existing municipal planning strategy, bylaw 035, and the municipal-wide land use bylaw 049, including all subsequent amendments thereto, and replace them with the new municipal planning strategy and the municipal-wide land use bylaw, both dated June 2nd, 2026, as presented.
And seconded by Councillor DeLong. Is there discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion signify by raising their hands. Those opposed? And we have two councillors that aren't here, so theirs would be a negative vote as well. So it is a unanimous decision to defeat the motion and start the process over of going to first reading. So the next motion, Deputy Mayor, do you want to make that next motion? I will just suggest before you put the motion on the floor, we'll have a little discussion because staff need to be clear about what we're asking them to do. So just so that in that discussion we can raise those points. So Deputy Mayor?
To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that municipal council direct staff to bring back revisions to the municipal planning strategy and municipal-wide land use bylaw, draft number 3, for council's consideration at the July 14th, 2026 council meeting, reflecting the discussion around the agricultural potential zone as presented. And I so move.
And a seconded by Councillor Hubley. Now, we should be clear because Deputy Mayor, you brought up the issue of the 6 lots. Are you satisfied with the response you received, or do you need further consideration on that?
I think for me, it's hard to know without seeing the map.
Okay.
I need to see how many, what the difference is from the original agricultural zone and now the overlay. So it's difficult for me to comment on that without seeing it.
Okay.
While it sounds great in theory, until I see a map in front of me, as I'm sure other people, especially Councillor Burns, who is another district that has significant agricultural land, it's hard to comment.
Okay, is there any other points, Councillor Oikel?
I just want to thank Councillor Burns for the points that he made regarding my concerns. I appreciate that, and I did not consider those things, so thank you very much.
Do we have it on the floor? No, yeah. Yeah, it's been moved by Burns, seconded by DeLong? No, Vino and Hubley. It's a long day. Is there any discussion on the motion?
I think we were going to make sure that the definitions regarding
Yep.
small
Definitions
homes were
around
going to
tiny
be-
homes and RVs.
Right.
Yep. Any other points? Ms. Gindi?
Would it be beneficial if we'll move into the different slide just to show what is being proposed under the overlay, so council will consider if there's any final revisions for at least draft 4 to come forward on July 14th? If not, that's okay.
I think we're okay. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. There is no further business on our agenda. The meeting is adjourned. And thank you, I should just say, again, thank you for the patience of those in the gallery and those that participated in providing information tonight. So thank you.